and welcome to another edition of Community Spotlight. I'm your host, Jared Fry, and joining me in studio today, I have Jansen Worley, the arborist for the City of Medina, and also Tim Swanson, the Parks and Recreation Director for the City of Medina. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me in studio today.
No problem.
Thank you.
And today we have a unique topic that can hit home from everyone. I'm sure if everyone can kind of think back, gosh, it's been almost 9 years now, but back in August 14th of 2003, we had a power outage here across northeast Ohio, I mean all the way up into almost New York area. And due to that, there have been a lot of regulations and stipulations regarding power lines in all of those states. And one of those has recently happened here in Ohio with Ohio Edison and First Energy having to do some standards with the National Electric Safety Code. And we're here today to talk a little bit about that and what residents should expect if they have any trees or vegetation along those power lines. And I guess first to start off, Tim, kind of tell us a little bit more about this initiative that kind of came out due to that big power outage back in 2003.
Yeah, absolutely. The City of Medina was recently notified by First Energy that they needed to do some vegetation management, and they contact our offices, Jansen and myself, to let us know where they will be in the city. They certainly put the City of Medina on a routine prune. Generally, every 4 to 5 years, they'll be pruning a circuit. And they identify different circuits at different times of years to be pruning. So we got notification that they would be pruning one of the circuits in Medina. And then what they do is they turn around and notify the residents that they will be pruning the trees. And generally they do that in advance. They let people know that they're going to be pruning the trees a couple months ahead of time. And that way they can come and send the forces out, the contractors who will be doing the pruning, which today is Nelson Tree Service or Asplin Tree Service.
And I guess to kind of clarify, when you refer to the circuits, what are you exactly referring to for the residents home?
Thank you. For the residents, there's really two types of circuits. There's the distribution lines. Those are the lines that really go to your home. Those lines you would find typically in the tree lawn or the city right-of-way. The transmission lines are the ones that carry the power to the substations. Those are those big 69,000 kilovolt telephone poles that you have in the backyards. And those typically run through private residents and or parks and or businesses. And so when you are getting when a company contacts you or the First Energy company contacts you, they specify, hey, we're pruning the distribution lines, we'll be pruning this tree, and we put a marking on it so that the resident is clear and it's specific where the work will be taking place.
Sure, and so that's not only, I guess, to summarize it in the easiest way, it's not just the lines that come into the house, it's also the lines that may pass through a property to service other areas.
Yes, and for today's discussion, we can certainly speak more on clarifying which one is which, but we'll kind of just give a general overview. But basically, we're covering both. That First Energy notified that they will be working on transmission lines as well as distribution lines.
Okay. And now working on, of course, that'll involve a pruning aspect to this, and definitely, trees or any type of vegetation they have in there can have a sentimental value to a homeowner, depending, if they planted it, circumstances behind the planting, and of course those trees do grow and get bigger. And as everyone knows, that power outage is basically caused by tree limbs and things like that getting in the way. So now they want to come in and clear those out. What kind of reaction have you guys been getting? I know we'll touch on the pruning in a second, but what kind of has been the reaction with everyone?
I do have one comment. I was here back in 2003, and before Jansen became our arborist. The pruning guidelines, we've been doing this since 1995 when I started here. I've been working with the power companies to achieve so that the lines are cleared and free from any interruptions. That's the main goal. In 2003, there was a significant interruption, caused a big blackout. It got blamed in not Medina, but in the Akron, Medina area, maybe even up into Lake Erie. And so they're really the power companies have got together and they really made a plan to prune the trees effectively so that they can have no or limit the interruptions of the power and the service. And so what we're seeing today probably are those standards being enforced a lot more, and the pruning is the biggest component that the companies have to control the interruptions.
Right.
And so Jansen will speak more on the types of pruning. But I just wanted to see that, yeah, we've seen a little bit more pruning, I think, than I was accustomed back in 1995 or 2003. The standards today are a lot more enforced, and they're going to get that type of pruning and clearance from the wires.
Well, basically, you learn from your mistakes,
yes.
and they're taking a more proactive approach
yes.
to prevent anything like that, which I think anyone would agree that had to sit through that when the blackout happened, that you definitely don't want to go through it again. If it's something that can be prevented, you definitely want to take the steps to do so, and that's why they've kind of instituted
correct
this way of doing things. Now, in terms like we mentioned, they come in now and they're going to set up to prune. So, Jansen, I guess there are really, when you look to prune, they've done it in 3 different types of ways. Maybe you could discuss those three types of ways and the reasoning behind those.
Yeah, when Ohio Edison comes in to prune, like Tim said, they do notify us before they even start anything. We get maps which are show us areas that are the circuits that they're focusing on that may have some sort of interruption, or a certain species of tree that grows faster than another that they want to target. And once they select those areas, then we notify those particular residents on that road. And depending on if it's distribution line or transmission line, the type of pruning that they do changes based on the specs for that particular line. With most of the distribution lines through the city, it's about 12-foot clearance in a circle around the entire line. With transmission lines, it depends on the voltage and the easement that they have on that particular property. Some properties in our town have prune-only easements, which means they're allowed to leave some of the trees, but all of them are getting pruned that are within a certain distance from the poles. We have several transmission lines that go through some of our parks where Ohio Edison can pretty much remove any vegetation that they need to within their given right-of-way. So the pruning changes drastically depending on what type of lines and the voltages of those. With our distribution lines, typically, a lot of the residents aesthetically realize that what's going on doesn't look right. When looking at it from a trained eye and perspective of tree health, the type of pruning that they're doing is called directional pruning, in which they're removing all of the vegetation that's growing up directly towards the lines and removing it back to a lateral that can sustain the growth away from the lines. So the old topping method of shaping the tree and making it nice and round and having good shape per se is not the healthiest for the tree. And there's been a lot of science and research going into this method of pruning that they're using. It meets ANSI, American National Safety Institute, their A300 standards, which are regulated through the Arboricultural Society. And basically what they're doing is healthy for the tree. The type of pruning that they're doing is going to minimize suckering, which is going to minimize the time that they have to come back. So, several years ago when they've came through, they haven't taken as much off. And, the quantity of material that they remove off of the tree is tree specific, depending on how fast the tree grows, whether it's soft-wooded or hard-wooded. So there's a lot of different aspects that go into why, one tree was pruned more heavily than the other. The other thing that has changed recently is the amount of overhang that they allow over the lines. It's not only the trees that are below the lines that are getting trimmed. Now we get into private property trees where they have, if it's a soft-wooded tree, if they have any type of overhang that could be greater than 12 feet from the lines, that is also going to be removed, because you have to visualize that that distribution line is feeding thousands of customers and not just your home or your neighborhood. So all of that overhang is now being removed, because if it's a soft-wooded tree, it's more susceptible to breaking. So not only do we have city trees being trimmed, we also have private trees being trimmed. And the reason, once our trees start to get larger, there's, a pretty good amount of brush that's left going away from the lines. It's not meaning that the tree's unstable, or it may appear to be unbalanced, but we have to remember that we haven't really touched the roots at all. Mm-hmm. So the stability of the tree is not really affected. It's just being pruned around a certain object, like a stop sign or any other line of sight.
Yeah, now you touched on a lot of information there, so I'm going to backtrack on you a little bit here. I guess first, when we look at the type of pruning, they changed their method. Like you said, it used to be kind of a rounding or a topping, mm-hmm. and you kind of touched on the word suckering. Kind of inform people kind of what happens there, and that's the reason they've gone away from the rounding of things. Kind of explain that for everybody.
Well, suckering is it's a tree's reaction to parts of the tree being removed. And what happens is when you cut off a limb, we want to cut it back to a limb that is able to sustain the growth. Typically, they'll use a quarter rule. So if we have a 4-inch limb, we don't want to cut it back to anything smaller than 1 inch, which will minimize suckering. And suckering comes about by removing too much of one branch, and the latent buds, which are underneath the bark, start to push off these really fast-growing sprouts that are poorly attached to the tree. And that kind of goes back to the reason why they have steered away from topping, is because by rounding off and shaping off the tree, you get this large influx. It's a tree's response to all of its foliage being removed. Mm-hmm. Because if you cut the entire top off of a tree, that growth has to go somewhere because it needs to produce in order for it to survive. And the problem that we have with suckering is that they're just poorly attached, and those wounds aren't able to close properly, and as fast as the suckers are growing, the tree is decaying just as fast. And it's not only a problem for wind damage, but it's also a problem because you have rapid growth growing straight towards power line.
And I kind of wanted to comment on that too. Back in 2003, when this occurred, that blackout occurred, the electrical standard people and the utility arborists got together, and they're like, how did this happen? We're pruning these trees, and the way Jansen explained it, they're pruning, rounding over. We were meeting the client's needs because we were pruning what we thought was correct for the utility, but also for the appearance. And so they asked themselves, how did this happen? Well, just like Jansen explained, when they left, that rapid growth with the suckering occurred, and it would be in the lines within 1 or 2 years. Well, Edison and Nelson Tree Service or Asplund or Davy, they wouldn't be there for 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And so here they had done the pruning, they walked away, and they felt like they did the right thing, but here the suckering, depending on the species, depending on the growth habit of that particular tree, they were getting interruptions. And so they really evaluated what they could do to properly prune trees and limit the interruptions. And so that's what we're seeing today. And Jansen stated it well. A homeowner kind of looks at this tree and goes, that just sometimes doesn't look, right. And so it starts to raise some questions. And the purpose of today is to let homeowners know, yeah, there's kind of been a shift in the type of pruning, but we back it up. It's the appropriate type of pruning. And that's, I just wanted to explain that.
Well, I think a good analogy to make for people is think about any of the roadways we travel from a day-to-day basis. 71, back roads, whatever. They just redid 3 out here recently. It needs resurfaced, it needs maintained, and their hope is they can fix that roadway, and then they don't have to come back to it for maybe 5 to 10 years before they have to repave it or do any major work to it again. Well, you're doing the same thing along the power line structure. Consider that the roadway, just a little more elevated off the ground. They're hoping by doing the pruning, like you said, they don't have to come back to that area of town for maybe 4 or 5 years and keep it maintained. But when they were rounding or topping, like you said, it was causing that, the equivalent of potholes, I guess, up there to occur with that quick suckering and growth of those trees. And I think by keeping something where they do this new method of trimming it will make them more structured where they are coming in on that 4-year cycle before they come back again. It gives that tree a chance to grow in the proper formation. As residents can be assured, the trees will grow back in the proper form. It may, like you said, may look a little weird at the beginning, but it is in the best interest of the tree and its life cycle. It eventually will grow back from that, I guess best way to describe it, maybe like that L-shaped format they might see on their tree.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we have seen instances of that already in the city. Is that correct? We've had maybe a year or two where they've come in and done that, and it's got a year or two growth under it.
Yeah, most of the areas we're talking about today occur in our older developments, the historic district, where we have overhead utilities. A lot of our newer developments, everything's underground, so we don't really have to worry too much about it. So basically, in today's day and age, we're dealing with trees that have been in the ground for 20, 25, 30, 50 years. And, you know, we're working with the utility companies to maintain those trees because they are valuable to our community and our infrastructure because of their size and their benefits ecologically and environmentally far outweigh the, you know, the minor pruning that's getting done to them, you know, which may or may not be distorting their growth, but we're allowing them to stay in a setting where they're still providing us benefits. And, you know, all this goes back to planning, you know, 20, 25 years ago when these trees were planted. Now we take a bit of a proactive approach and try and plant the right tree in the right spot so we don't have these major problems with over pruning that we do nowadays. So if a tree is removed and replaced and it's under a utility, it's going to be a tree that's approved by the utility company for that specific site.
And I'll touch on that in a second, but I wanted to go back to one other point you brought up is talking about the soft versus hard woods in terms of the overage of anything overhead. And again, to clarify that for residents, maybe some of the hardwoods, they might be more apt to maybe try to leave in place to help with that healthy growth because there's less of a risk of breakage or anything that could allow it to fall into that line.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're dealing with the softer woods, whether it be high winds, decay, what may have you, more susceptible to collapsing and causing damage.
Yeah, correct.
So all in all, they're looking out for the best interest of the residents as a whole. Now, it may affect single properties and how they prune these trees, but it actually looks out for the better interest of the whole. Because if it goes, I mean, just because it falls down in your backyard doesn't mean you're the only one that's going to lose power. It's going to affect quite a bit of a grid, and maybe even larger, depending on the type of line running through the property.
Absolutely.
So that's, and then now you were just touching on the statement of if they have to remove a tree or replace a tree. What is there? Do they have a qualification? What's their standards to make that determination of, instead of just a pruning, this tree needs to be removed totally and replaced with something else?
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, you know, this is kind of what brought us here today, Jared, was the communication between First Energy and this area, Ohio Edison, and the city and the residents is kind of developing faster and better, and they are very much helping to make sure that the tree that is being left in the tree lawn is something that the residents are going to be happy with, that the city is going to be happy with. In the instance where the tree needs to come out, it's basically because it's the wrong tree in the wrong place. It's a tree that is growing, it's healthy, it's strong, but it's going to be too big for that site. And it wasn't much of a problem maybe 20 years ago when those trees were a lot smaller. And so the tree, you know, pear trees, some of these maple trees were planted under power lines before our time.
Right.
But now the compatibility of the lines and the pruning regulations and the requirements, basically it's kind of a homeowner's call. If the homeowner is unhappy with the appearance of the tree after the pruning, we know this tree is not the correct species under there. We work with the power company to say, you know what, if they would remove that tree, then we'll replace it. And so that's kind of the partnership that we've started. It's something that we believe will help us overall get a tree back where there once was a tree and then we had to remove it and then put it back. You know, our preference is to keep the trees, but we certainly acknowledge with the Edison company that the city, it's in the city right away, it's in front of people's homes, but somehow we're kind of the mediator because we are responsible for what's in that tree lawn. It was planted at one time either by the city or for the city, and so we feel that this relationship going forward is something we want to build from. Not every tree that's pruned needs to be removed, or not every tree that's under wires needs to be removed. It's kind of a case by case, and we'll go the extra effort to work with those residents when that time comes.
Now, as they do this work, is it mostly, I've heard you mention the tree lawn a couple of times, is it basically just more front yard tree lawns, or are there instances where they're coming through backyards due to the direction of the power lines?
The majority is in the tree lawn.
Okay.
The majority of the calls or the distribution line is in the tree lawns. We had a couple instances this summer already where they're behind residents' home. It's a corridor, and so that sometimes happens, but the norm is out in the tree lawn.
Okay. And again, that would be, like you mentioned, the older developments due to the fact that the newer ones tend to put their services under the ground.
Correct.
Yeah. So that's and they'll come through. They will provide any notification, like you said, on doors, little flyers and things of that nature to let people know they'll be coming in there and doing work in the area. And now, if people have questions or concerns, I'm sure the information's on that flyer as well. But where would you like to direct people to if they have questions with this work going on?
There are a few transmission lines that do go through some of our newer developments. We've been talking about both of them. The work that is going on the transmission lines, there were door hangers and notifications sent out to those residents via mail. If they have any questions in regards to the work on the transmission lines, they need to call the number on the bottom of the paper that was mailed to them from Asplin Tree Service. And they will handle any questions. If it's site specific and you want to know what markings are on your trees in your backyards, feel free to call them. They'll set up an appointment and go over all the work that is going to be performed on your property through that easement. Right. With the distribution lines, depending on what company it is, it was Asplin. Now they've switched back to Nelson. There's door hangers hung out. They also try and contact the residents and just let them know that they're going to be working on the tree lawn. And then they also forward all of that information on locations to the city as well.
Okay. And I also see, per the news release that you have here through the Parks Department, First Energy's customer service number, which is 1-800-633-4766. Again, that's 1-800-633-4766. And also, if you have any questions or concerns, you can also go to the First Energy website, which is www.firstenergycorp.com. Then you can select Ohio Edison, and then click on safety and look for the maintaining trees or selecting the right tree link. And then, of course, I'm sure there's information as well on the city website, and they can also feel free to contact you guys too, I'm sure, as well.
They do. I know the Ohio Edison group really goes out of their way to contact us and communicate that they're going to be coming into town. And moving forward from this point, the next circuit, we don't know what that is, but they'll contact our office and we'll sit down, just like Jansen said, we'll review the maps. Meanwhile, they'll be looking at our trees or the property owner's trees. They'll be out on those properties identifying the work that needs to be done in the future. And so moving forward, that's what we would like to do, and we would continue to support this effort and also supporting our residents so that we can have trees and utilities in the same location.
Yeah. And I guess too, it may look bad as a temporary thing sometimes, and it may scare people, like you said. Some of the images may look like the trees all one side and it's going to fall over or something. But I guess, Jansen, just to reiterate, it is safe because it's structurally sound from the trunk up. The roots haven't been touched. The trunk hasn't been touched. It's just kind of a little bit at the top there, so to speak.
Yeah.
That
all trees take maintenance, and bottom line is, as long as you do it right, put the proper cuts on it, they're going to respond and overcome it. And what we want to do is just perpetuate our trees to be there as long as possible.
Yeah.
So.
And then the trees will grow back from that form from the pruning. Again, they're cutting like I said, they want to come back in a 4 to 5 year cycle, so they're going to trim them back to fit that time frame. So it will it's kind of getting that short haircut, but it will eventually grow itself back, at least for some of us sometimes. But it'll grow back in kind of a more round, now do I want to say rounded form, or it'll kind of grow back to form but still leave that opening for those power lines.
Yeah, and that original shape that is left after they've come through recently, they're going to take off a little bit more this year than they have ever before. Looking down the road 4 years, if they come back, all they're probably going to be removing is the suckering from the tree's response to our pruning the previous 4 years. So once we get those branches established that are going to be growing away from the wires, the pruning down the road is going to be very minimal.
Yeah, and also coupled with that was said very well, is our long-term management plan is to replace the trees when necessary with the right trees under the power lines. So that what we're saying there is we're going to plant a tree that its overall mature height will grow a lot smaller, than the current existing tree, so that there's less pruning needed, and ultimately a desirable looking tree as well.
Yeah, so I appreciate everyone in the residents' patience as this process goes forth. It is for the best interest of all residents, and I'm sure everyone enjoys having their air conditioning and their refrigeration, especially in these hot months. So keep that in mind as those guys are doing their work out there. And actually, as they do their work out there, they will take care of everything when they come out there. They prune, removal, and things of that nature when they come out and do that work. Is that correct?
They do the work that was identified on that plan. So, definitely get with if you have any questions, call that number on that plan, and they'll do the work that was described in there. If there's something in addition to that, then that's something. You mentioned the removals. If it needs to be removed and it wasn't called for, that's when you would get the city involved, and we'll go from there.
Okay. And then just contact either one of your departments.
Yeah, but for the most part, call the number on that card that comes out from Ohio Edison.
Okay. And then I guess in closing, anything you want to make sure you make clear to the residents that maybe we haven't quite touched on all the way, or anything to just to assure them of?
Basically, if there's utility pruning going on, I know everybody says, it's a city tree and they're not sure whether or not we've been notified. We go through a very detailed process with making sure we talk to everybody. That's why we're here today, to let everybody know that we are aware of what's going on and we approve of it, and it's in the best interest.
Yeah, and hopefully, as we do this time and time again, we can post those press releases reminding residents, hey, we got notification, the utility company's coming again, and maybe we can get it down to the circuit and the streets that you may see them on.
So very similar to like how we do our hydrant flushing when we advertise for the cycles of those. So
we envision doing that moving forward.
Sure, that'd be a great thing for the residents, and I definitely want to thank you guys for taking your time today to really break this down for the residents and let them know that the city is on top of this, and we're going to work through for the best interest of everybody and getting these trees out of the way of the power lines and make everything great for everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, well, thank you. That'll put a wrap on this edition of the Community Spotlight. Stay tuned here to MCA 37, Medina TV, for any future programs involving the city of Medina. Have a great night, everyone.